Harry Headlong, Esquire, of Headlong Hall in the Vale of Llanberis in Carnarvonshire, like all other Welsh squires, was fond of shooting, hunting, racing, drinking, and other such innocent amusements. But unlike other Welsh squires, he actually suffered certain phenomena called books to find their way into his house, and, by dint of lounging over them after dinner, became seized with a violent passion to be thought a philosopher and a man of taste, and accordingly set off on an expedition to London, where he formed an extensive acquaintance with philosophers and dilettanti. And it now became his chief wish to have them all together at Headlong Hall, arguing over his old port and burgundy the various knotty points which puzzled his pericranium. He has therefore sent them invitations to pass their Christmas at Headlong Hall.
Headlong Hall, the novel by Thomas Love Peacock, dramatised by James Saunders and narrated by Michael Hordern, with Daniel Massey and Ronald Lacey.
Thus, as the first light of a December morning peeps through the windows of the Holyhead Mail, it brings to view 4 of the guests, dozing, as best they may, one in each corner.
The day is none of the finest.
Quite the contrary.
You believe it is of the finest?
Excuse me, he means surely contrary to the finest.
Precisely.
I agree.
Absolutely. On the other hand, it could be argued...
These 4 persons are Mr. Foster, the perfectibilian, Mr. Escot, the deteriorationist, Mr. Jenkison, the statu-quo-ite, and the Reverend Dr. Gaster, who, though neither a philosopher nor a man of taste, won the squire's fancy with a learned dissertation on the art of stuffing a turkey. This is Foster, the perfectibilian.
For instance, consider the progression from sliding block to wheeled conveyance, from route cart to the vehicle in which we now travel. Consider also what other remarkable improvements have been made, not least the railway, to facilitate intercourse between distant parts of the kingdom. In short, everything we look on attests the progress of mankind in all the arts of life and its gradual advancement towards a state of unlimited perfection.
On the contrary,
Escot, the deteriorationist.
these so-called improvements are links in the great chain of corruption, which will soon fetter the whole human race in slavery and wretchedness. Your improvements proceed in a simple ratio, while the wants and appetites they engender proceed in a compound one. Thus, one generation acquires 50 wants, and 50 means of supplying them are invented, which each in its turn engenders 2 new ones, so that the next generation has 100, the next 200, the next 400, till the human being degenerates so rapidly from the primitive dignity of his sylvan origin that the whole species must at length be exterminated by its own imbecility and vileness.
Your opinions seem to differ toto chelo.
Jenkison, the statu-quo-ite.
I have often debated the matter in my own mind, pro and con, and have at length arrived at this conclusion, that the quantities of moral perfectibility and of deterioration are so exactly balanced by their reciprocal results, that the species, with respect to the sum of good and evil, knowledge and ignorance, happiness and misery, remains exactly and perpetually in statu quo.
But surely, look at the progress in the arts and sciences. Chemistry, botany, astronomy.
Surely, look at the growth of corruption, luxury, selfishness.
The Reverend Dr. Gaster has woken.
Really, gentlemen, this is a very atheistical conversation, and I should have thought out of it.
Breakfast, gentlemen!
News which so gladdens the ears of the divine that his alacrity in springing from the vehicle superinduces a distortion of the ankle, and he is obliged to limp into the inn between Mr. Escot and Mr. Jenkison, the former observing,
My point! Evil abounds and multiplies. Why be surprised at a sprained ankle?
and the latter,
My point! What prettier a balance than the comfort of a good breakfast set against the pain of a sprained ankle?
Let us leave our three philosophers and the unfortunate divine, and look in for a moment at Headlong Hall, where Squire Headlong is superintending operations prior to the arrival of his guests. Multitudes of packages have arrived by land and water. Books, wine, cheeses, turkeys, telescopes, tongues, quadrants, sextants, fiddles, flute, figs, spices, air pumps, soda water, French horns, bottled ale and porter, scenery for a private theatre, pickles and fish sauce, barrels of oysters, fruits and confections, salt salmon, and jars of Portugal grapes. Deposited at random as they arrive, ale in the drawing-room, fiddles and fish sauce in the library, the servants flying from place to place, while the squire signifies from time to time a rage fermented to the highest degree of exasperation by converting some newly unpacked article, book, bottle, ham or fiddle, into a missile against the head of some unfortunate servant who does not move in a ratio of velocity corresponding to the intensity of his master's desires.
Fool! Cretin!
We had best return to the inn. Escot has the floor.
The use of animal food, conjointly with fire, is a principal cause of the degeneracy of mankind. Original man lived in the woods. Roots and fruits supplied his nutriment. He had few desires and no diseases. Then he began to pervert the flesh of animals into food, and luxury, disease, and premature death were let loose upon the world. From that period, the stature of mankind has been in a state of gradual diminution, till I have no doubt that the whole race will vanish from the face of the earth. Will you kindly pass the mustard?
I cannot agree.
Foster, perfectibilian.
The use of fire was necessary to give being to the various arts of life, which will finally conduct the race to a pure and perfect felicity.
There is much to be said on both sides.
Jenkison, statu quo.
And until the question be resolved, I content myself with eating whatever is placed before me, fruit or flesh, cooked or raw.
I am really astonished
Reverend Gaster.
at these heterodox opinions. All animals were created solely and exclusively for the use of man.
Even the tiger that devours you.
Certainly.
How do you prove that?
It requires no proof. It is a point of doctrine. It is written, therefore it is so.
So the ox was expressly made to be eaten by man, and man presumably was expressly made to be eaten by the tiger. But as wild oxen exist where there are no men, and men where there are no tigers, it would seem that in these instances they do not properly answer the ends of their creation.
A mystery, a mystery.
However, since learned men disagree as to whether man should be carnivorous or frugivorous, I conclude that he is omnivorous, and so I act.
A truly orthodox conclusion. Indeed, loaves and fishes are typical of a mixed diet. The toast, if you please, and the eggs, and the beef, and the mustard.
Time's up, gentlemen! On the road, if you please!
Nor could all the pathetic remonstrances of the Reverend Divine that he had not half breakfasted gain him 1 minute from the inexorable Jehu. How is it at Headlong Hall?
Fools! Dunderheads! Goats!
Back to the Holyhead Mail.
You will allow at least that the wild man of the woods could not transport himself through the forest with as much facility as one of these vehicles transports us through this cultivated country.
But what is the advantage of locomotion to the wild man? He is happy in one spot, and there he remains. The civilized man is wretched wherever he is, and then congratulates himself on being accommodated with a machine that will whirl him somewhere else to be as miserable as ever.
Yes, but
I agree absolutely with both of you. On the other hand, to the contrary, it could be argued...
We can now return to Headlong Hall. For the lovely Caprioletta Headlong has arrived, the squire's sister, from the residence of her maiden aunt in Carnarvon, to do the honours of the house, to arrange disorder and harmonise discord.
Blessed be God and St. David.
The butler. In a trice she has everything disposed in its proper station, and her brother, his tempestuous spirit now as smooth as the surface of the lake of Llanberis, all impatience for the appearance of his guests, of which the first is just now arriving.
Milestone!
Headlong.
Marmaduke Milestone, Esquire, who arrives with a portfolio under his arm. Mr. Milestone is a picturesque landscape gardener of the first celebrity, with an eye to business.
You must take a look at the estate.
Delighted.
Next come our three philosophers and the Reverend Divine, then Mr. Cranium, the craniologist, with his lovely daughter, Miss Cephalis Cranium.
My goodness, Mr. Escot.
Good Lord! Cephalis.
Mr. Escot, it must be explained, was formerly the lover of Miss Cephalis, till he incurred the wrath of the father by laughing at a very profound craniological dissertation which the old gentleman delivered. Nor has Mr. Escot yet discovered the means of mollifying him. Thus Cephalis blushes like a carnation at sight of Escot, Escot glows like a corn poppy at sight of Cephalis, and Cranium, scrutinizing both, undergoes several variations, from the dark red of the peony to the deep blue of the convolvulus. Who comes next? Ah, yes, Gall, who is a worse poet than he is a reviewer, and his colleague Maclaurin, who is a worse reviewer than he is a poet. Mr. Cornelius Chromatic, an amateur of the fiddle, with his blooming daughters, Tenorina and Graziosa. Sir Patrick O'Prism, a dilettante painter, but we shall deal with the rest later. Let us now, as they settle in before dinner, join some of them on a walk round the grounds.
I perceive.
Milestone.
These grounds have never been touched by the finger of taste, Headlong.
Alas, my father in the latter part of his life troubled himself about nothing but the cellar. See here, the pedestal of a statue with only half a leg and 4 toes remaining. There were many here once.
Toes?
Statues. When I was a boy, I used to sit every day on the shoulders of Hercules.
My dear sir, accord me permission to wave the wand of enchantment over all this. I shall blow up the rocks, cut down the trees. In their place, pagodas and Chinese bridges, gravel walks and bowling greens. One age brought to light the treasures of ancient learning, a second, metaphysics, a third, astronomy. Ours is the age of picturesque gardening, which has given a new outline to the physiognomy of nature.
Aye, sir, for the worse.
O'Prism, the painter.
Your levelling and trimming and docking and clumping destroys all the intricacies of nature, all the graduated harmonies of light and shade. I never saw one of your improved places, as you call them, without thinking of Hounslow Heath.
You're confusing the picturesque with the beautiful, my dear sir.
There's no difference.
Indeed there is, I think.
Gall, the critic.
As any literary critic must know, plus a third character which you both ignore, that of unexpectedness. Now, I refer you to my article...
And what you call this character of unexpectedness when you walk around the grounds for a second time? Ha-ha!
We leave Squire Headlong to be edified by this controversy, and join our 3 philosophers in another part of the grounds.
The blessings of civilization extend themselves to the meanest members of the community. Consider that simple boatman, singing as he glides over the tranquil surface of the lake below us in his little boat. Is he not, comparatively to men of the water in earlier centuries, both happier and more enlightened?
Not in the least.
Oh, my dear Escot!
Do you think the mariners of England are in any respect superior to those who preserved the liberties of Greece at the Battle of Salamis?
Certainly. All the vessels in that memorable bay, Grecian and Persian, would have been put to flight by one English 74. Therefore, the English sailor is vastly superior to the ancient Greek.
Scientifically, not morally.
Men are virtuous in proportion as they are enlightened. As we increase in knowledge, so we increase in virtue.
I wish it were so. The sciences advance, true. A modern mathematician knows more than Newton knew, agreed. But does this make him a Newton? Does it give him that range of intellect from which the discoveries of Newton sprang? Independence, individuality, disinterested virtue, active benevolence, these are the qualities I desire to find, and of which each succeeding age produces fewer examples. There is scarcely such a thing to be found as a single individual man. A few classes compose the whole of society, and when you know one of a class, you know it all. Give me the wild man of the woods, the original, unthinking, unscientific, unlogical savage.
Yes, but...
Mr. Foster, if I fall into the river, an unsophisticated man will jump in and bring me out. But a philosopher will look on with the utmost calmness. Consider me in the light of a projectile, and making a calculation of the degree of force with which I have impinged the surface, the resistance of the fluid, the velocity of the current, and the depth of the water, he will ascertain with the greatest nicety in what part of the mud at the bottom I may be found.
You are too pessimistic, Escot. And you, Foster, if I may say so, too optimistic. The truth lies between the two. Nothing improves, nothing deteriorates. Consider...
Dinner bell!
And the 3 philosophers agreed for once, head precipitously for the house. Later. The lights glitter on the festal board as the sun terminates his diurnal course. The ladies have retired. The Burgundy has taken 2 or 3 tours of the table.
Push about the bottle, Mr. Escot. It stands with you.
Squire Headlong, this is the very nectar itself. You've certainly discovered the terrestrial paradise, but it flows with a better liquor than milk and honey.
Mr. MacLaurel, there is a degree of profaneness in that observation. Milk and honey was the pure food of the antediluvian patriarchs who knew not the use of the grape. Happily for them.
Happy indeed. The first inhabitants of the world knew neither wine nor animal food. It is therefore by no means incredible that they lived to the age of several centuries. Without the faculty of speech, unencumbered by clothes, he lived in the open air. His first step out of which, as Hamlet truly observes, is into his grave. In process of time he began to build, whence grew villages, then cities. Luxury, oppression, poverty, misery, and disease kept pace with his pretended improvements, till from a free, strong, healthy, peaceful animal he has become a weak, distempered, cruel, carnivorous slave.
As to the open air and the absence of clothes, your doctrine is orthodox. As to the faculty of speech, that he certainly had, for the authority of Moses...
Push about the bottle.
Now, Escot, do you mean to compare the felicity of your wild man living on acorns and sleeping on the ground to that of a Newton, ranging through limitless space, penetrating the arcana of universal motion, or that of a Locke, unraveling the labyrinth of the mind, or a Lavoisier, reducing all nature to its elements, a Shakespeare, a Milton?
We are talking of happiness, Foster. What comparison would you make between the tranquil being of the wild man of the woods and the wretched and turbulent existence of Milton? The victim of persecution, poverty, blindness, and neglect.
Even so, no philosopher would resign his mental acquisitions for the purchase of any terrestrial good.
No man will sacrifice his own identity for any worldly acquisition. Agreed. But every man, without exception, would willingly sacrifice that of others for it. Consider the species of literary people, the critics. There is perhaps less disinterestedness, less liberality, less benevolence, and more envy, hatred, and uncharitableness among them than among any other description of men.
Are you looking at me, sir?
Gall, the reviewer.
I happen to be looking at you, sir. One must look somewhere, or close one's eye.
But you allude, I presume, sir, to the review which MacLaurel and I produced.
How could I, sir, when I've never read a single page of it?
Never read our review?
I look on periodical criticism in general to be a species of shop where panegyric and defamation are sold. That trade can do without my encouragement.
You are perhaps, sir, an enemy of literature in general.
If I were, sir, I should be a better friend to critics.
And the basis of your objection?
Periodical criticism disseminates superficial knowledge. It checks the habit of thinking for oneself. It delivers partial opinions and thereby misleads the judgment. It is never conducted with a view to the general interests of literature, but to serve the interested ends of individuals. Will that do?
You can, sir. A man must live.
While he can live honourably and justly, Mr. MacLaurel, he must live. Otherwise, he need not.
Every man, sir, lives according to his own notions of honour and justice. Only there is a wee difference among the learned with respect to the definition of the term.
I believe it is generally admitted that one of the ingredients of justice is disinterestedness.
Not among the philosophers of Edinburgh. There is no such thing there.
What?
It is all a matter of individual feeling. A peasant saves a man's life, let us say, for the same reason that a footpad cuts his thrapple. And a philosopher delivers a man from a prison for the same reason that a prime minister puts him into it, because it is conformable to his own particular feelings of the moral and political fitness of things.
Gaster! Oh, wake the Reverend Doctor, someone. Doctor, the bottle stands with you. Finish your heel tap, man. Pour and pass on.
So you can, sir. Every man is the centre of his own system and endeavours as much as possible to adapt everything around him to his own particular view.
Off with your heel taps. Pass on, pass on.
I perfectly agree with Mr. MacLaurel's definition of self-love and disinterestedness.
Cranium.
Every man's actions are determined by his views, and those are determined by the shape of his skull. A man in whom the organ of benevolence is not developed cannot be benevolent. He in whom it is so cannot be otherwise.
The organ of self-love is prodigiously developed in the greater number of subjects that have fallen under my observation. Also the organs of hypocrisy, avarice, destructiveness, and covetousness. I have a specimen here. Observe the various protuberances. Oh. Kindly pass it round. This skull belonged to Sir Christopher Wren.
Did he take an interest in craniology?
I mean, it was his own.
His skull as a young man, I would say.
Which way does one pass a skull?
Note the highly developed organ of constructiveness.
Ah, the organ of building, not, of course, natural to the featherless biped, when he lived in a natural state of innocence under a tree.
The tree of life, yes, till he had tasted of the forbidden fruit.
When the organ of constructiveness was added to his anatomy.
As a punishment for his transgression.
I should say, to redress an unnatural imbalance in nature, since he was becoming too contented.
It then led him to the building of cities and proved the greatest curse of his existence.
Memento mori! Come, Sir Christopher, have a bumper of brandy.
Headlong has the skull.
A very classical application, Squire Headlong. The Romans were in the practice of adhibiting skulls at their banquets, and sometimes little skeletons of silver, as a silent admonition to the guests to enjoy life while it lasted.
Sound doctrine, Mr. McLaren.
I question that. The vinous spirit has a great influence on the deterioration of the human race.
On the contrary, it has been said to exalt the imagination and fire the genius. Laudibus arguitur vinae vinosus homerus.
Homer must have been a wino from the way he goes on about it.
The use of wine is pernicious in excess, but useful in moderation. It kills some, but saves the lives of others.
Absolutely. Pass the bottle. Well, Sir Christopher does not seem to have raised our spirits. Chromatic, favour us with a specimen of your vocal powers. Something in point.
With pleasure.
Cornelius Chromatic.
In his last bin.
Oh, wait, can't you fiddle with it?
With what, Sir Harry?
Here, take this.
Oh, right. In his last bin, Sir Peter lies, who knew not what it was to frown. Death took him mellow by surprise, and in his cellar stopped him down. Through all our land we could not boast a knight more gay, more prompt than he, to rise and fill a bumper toast, and pass it round with 3 times 3. He kept at true good humour's mark, the social flow of pleasure's tide. He never made our brow look dark, nor caused a tear but when he died. No sorrow round his tomb should dwell, more pleased his gay old ghost would be, for funeral song and passing a bell, to hear no sound but 3 times 3.
At this point, Mr. Panscope emerges from a deep reverie. Panscope is a chemical, botanical, geological, astronomical, mathematical, metaphysical, meteorological, anatomical, physiological, galvanistical, musical, pictorial, bibliographical, critical philosopher who has run through the whole circle of the sciences and understands them all equally well. Hark, he speaks.
I've heard with the most profound attention everything which the gentleman on the other side of the table there...
Escot, sir.
Thank you, sir. Which Mr. Escot has thought proper to advance on the subject of human deterioration. And I must take the liberty to remark that it augurs a very considerable degree of presumption in any individual to set himself up against the authority of so many great men as may be marshalled under the opposite banners of the controversy, such as Aristotle, Plato, St. Chrysostom, St. Jerome, Simonides, Gronovius, Hemster Husius, Longinus, Sir Isaac Newton, Thomas Paine, Dr. Paley, the King of Poland, Cicero, Monsieur Gautier, Hippocrates, Machiavelli, Milton, Collis Cibber, Boiardo, Gregory Nazianzus, Locke, D'Alembert, Boccaccio, Daniel Defoe, Erasmus, Zimmermann, Solomon, Confucius, Zoroaster, and Thomas à Kempis.
I presume, sir, you are one of those who value authority more than reason.
The authority, sir, of all these great men, whose works I've read through from beginning to end, deposes with irrefragable refutation against your ratiocinative speculations, wherein you seem desirous by the futile process of analytical dialectics to subvert the pyramidal structure of synthetically deduced opinions, which have withstood the secular revolutions of physiological disquisition, and which I maintain to be transcendentally self-evident, categorically certain, and syllogistically demonstrable.
Oh, bravo!
Oh, yes,
Pass the bottle! The very best speech that ever was made!
With only the slight disadvantage of being unintelligible.
Sir, as Dr. Johnson observed on a similar occasion, I am not obliged to furnish you with an understanding.
I fear, sir, you would have some difficulty in furnishing me with such an article from your own stock.
Sir, do you question my understanding?
I only question, sir, where I expect a reply, which from things that have no existence I am not visionary enough to anticipate.
Very well, sir. I take the liberty to put in plain terms that all your opinions are extremely absurd.
I should be sorry, sir, to advance an opinion that you would not think so.
Death and fury, sir!
Say no more, sir. I accept your apology.
Apology?
You have lost your temper, which I consider equivalent to a confession that you have the worst of the argument.
Lightning the devil, sir!
No civil war here! Temperance! In the name of Bacchus. A glee! Music hath charms to bend the knotted oak. Sir Patrick, you'll join.
O Prism, the painter.
Troth with all my heart, for by my soul I'm bothered completely, begone by Jesus.
Agreed then, you and I and Chromatic. Bumpers, come, strike up.
A heel tap, I never could bear it. So fill me a bumper of claret. Let the bottle pass freely, don't shirk it, nor spare it. But a heel tap, I never could bear it. No twilight, no backless rules orders. No drinking, no shrinking, no drinking in corners. Let us moisten our places, still thirsty and porous. No drinking, no shrinking, no drinking in corners. A heel tap, I never could bear it. So fill me a bumper of claret. Let the bottle pass freely, don't shirk it, nor spare it. But a heel tap, I never could bear it.
At which point the little butler waddles in with a summons from the ladies to tea and coffee. After a short debate...
We should go immediately. The longer we stay here, the more we shall deteriorate.
The transition from bottle to female society is an indisputable amelioration of the state of a sensitive man.
I am just as well in one place as another.
The ladies are certainly more picturesque.
More visually harmonious pyjamas.
Indispensable for a romantic duet.
St. Paul, I think, will forgive us.
The question is put and carried by a large majority. We are now in the library with the ladies. Escot has placed himself next to his love, the beautiful Cephalis Cranium. Cranium himself, his bumper belligerent soothed by the balm of Burgundy, has laid aside much of the terror of his frown, while Foster has joined the lovely Caprioletta Headlong, the squire's sister. In a corner, Panscope, the polymath, enraged by Escot's cool contempt of him, sits sipping his coffee and planning revenge, of which more later. Milestone, the improver on nature, meanwhile, has produced his portfolio for the edification of Miss Tenorina Chromatic, the musician's charming daughter, and to help his case with Headlong.
This, you perceive, was the natural state of one part of the grounds of Lord Littlebrain, a most satisfied user of my little talents. A thick, gloomy wood, you see? A stream dashing pointlessly from one place to another, all overshadowed by these rebellious boughs.
The sweet, romantic spot. How beautifully the birds must sing there on a summer evening.
Your taste is at fault, Miss Tenorina. Look, here is the same place, corrected. See the beautiful curve of the gravel walk, clumps of the old wood, you see, in a wonderful symmetry. The stream has become a canal with smooth banks sloping to the water's edge, and there is Lord Littlebrain rowing in an elegant little boat.
Oh, magical faith.
Another view of the original grounds. A large rock, mountain ash rooted in its fissures, all overgrown with ivy and moss to no apparent purpose. And from here bursts a little fountain that wastes itself, running down its rugged sides.
Oh, how beautiful! How I should love the melody of that miniature cascade.
Beautiful? Hideous, Miss Tenorina. Common and popular. Now, observe the metamorphosis. The rock is cut into the shape of a giant. In one hand he holds a horn through which the fountain is thrown to a prodigious elevation. In the other is a ponderous stone so exactly balanced as to appear ready to fall on the head of any person who happens to be beneath. And there is Lord Littlebrain walking under it.
Oh, egregious, my Jupiter. You shall cut me a giant before you go, Milestone.
Good. I'll order my little corps of pioneers. In a week you'll not know the place.
At this point, mercifully, the beautiful Cephalis, summoned to her harp, cuts short further instruction.
Oh, who art thou so swiftly flying? My name is Love, the child replied. Swifter I pass than south wind sighing, or streams through summer vales that glide. And who art thou his flight pursuing? 'Tis cold neglect whom now you see, the little god you there are viewing will die if once he's touched by me. Oh, who art thou so fast proceeding? Ne'er glancing back thine eyes of flame, marked but by few through earth I am speeding, and opportunity's my name. What form is that which scowls beside thee? Repentance is the form you see. Learn then the fate yet might betide thee. She sees as them who sees not me.
The little butler now appears with a summons to supper, shortly after which the party disperses for the night. The following morning.
Oh, Lord, rebuke me not in thy wrath, neither chasten me in thy hot displeasure.
The Reverend Dr. Gaster finds himself unaccountably queasy this morning, and breakfasts in bed on a mug of buttered ale and an anchovy toast. Our three philosophers are down at 8, however, where the little butler stands sentinel at a side table furnished with all the apparatus of tea, coffee, chocolate, eggs, rolls, toast, muffins, potted beef and partridge, ham, tongue and anchovy. After which they decide to take a walk to Dramatic to see the improvements carried on in that vicinity. We shall join them later. Meanwhile, Headlong and Milestone appear, and agree, over muffins and partridge, to visit a ruined tower within the grounds which Milestone thinks he can improve. Where is Panscope, the plotter of revenge? Panscope has taken a ramble with Cranium, in the course of which he professes enthusiasm for the science of craniology and love for the beautiful Cephalis, in that order. His revenge, then, is to be the supplanting of Escot in the bosom of his beloved, to speak, at least metaphorically. And indeed, so successful is the buttering up of Cranium that the old man is even now resolving, in the manner of the heroic age, when it was deemed superfluous to consult the lady as to her feelings in the matter, that Miss Cranium shall be made the happy bride to the polyhistor. We leave them now to settle the preliminaries, and join the three philosophers in their walk to Dramatic. They emerge by a winding ascent from the Vale of Llanberis to arrive at Bethgelert. Another 5 miles brings them to the embankment, still in the process of completion, which, by connecting the 2 counties of Merioneth and Carnarvon, would exclude the sea from an extensive tract. Looking upward, with their backs to the sea, they behold a scene which no other in this country could parallel. On the left, vast rocks and precipices intersected with little torrents. On the right, the triple summit of Merwin. In the depth, the wild and stormy outline of the Snowdonian chain, with the giant Wuthfer towering in the midst. The three philosophers gaze silently at the spectacle, and at length turn away and proceed to the little town of Dramatic, which is built on land recovered in a similar manner from the sea. After inspecting the manufactories there and refreshing themselves at the inn on a cold saddle of mutton and a bottle of sherry, they retrace their steps towards Headlong Hall.
I confess, the sight of those manufactories which have suddenly sprung up in the bosom of these wild and desolate scenes filled me with horror.
Come, think of the vast sum of human industry to which the manufacturing system contributes. Seas covered with vessels, ports resounding with life, profound researches, scientific inventions, employment given to innumerable families, and the resulting comforts and conveniences of life for the whole community.
What are you asking me to admire? Seas covered with vessels, each of which contains 2 or 3 tyrants, and from 50 to 1,000 ignorant, gross and perverted slaves. Ports resounding with life, in other words, with noise and drunkenness, avarice, intemperance and prostitution. Profound researches, scientific inventions, to what end? To stimulate depraved appetites, to invent unnatural wants. Complicated machinery, behold its blessings. Look for a moment at midnight into a cotton mill. The smell of oil, the smoke of lamps, the rattling of wheels. See the little human machines that keep play with the revolutions of the iron work. Observe their pale and ghastly features. Wherever this boasted machinery is established, the children of the poor are death-doomed from their cradles. Look! Look there! Do you see that little rosy-cheeked girl tripping down the hillside with a basket of heath on her head? Do you hear her singing? Go then. Explain to her the benefits of machinery and invention as you shut her in a mill.
Well, yes, but
yes, and as for the parents, victims of this unhealthy toil, they have neither the corporeal energy of the savage nor the mental acquisitions of a civilized man. Automata, component parts of machines which administer to the pampered appetites of the few, who consume in indolence the fruits of the earth and contribute nothing to the benefit of the community.
Yes, these are evils, Escot, but they have their counterbalancing advantages. The life you describe is bad for the individual, but good for others who enjoy the benefit of his labour.
By what right do they so?
By the right of all property and all possession, le droit du plus fort.
You justify that principle?
I neither justify nor condemn it. It is so. And though it is the source of enormous evil, it is also the source of abundant good, or it would not have so many supporters.
Fiddlesticks! Men every day support the most enormous evils, which their own miserable self-interest induces them to think good.
Good and evil exist only as they are perceived. Indeed, the word reality only signifies strong belief. So how can that which a man perceives to be good be in reality an evil to him?
The views of such a man are false. If he could be made to see the truth...
He sees his own truth. What is truth but what a man troweth? His belief. The truth of one is not the truth of another.
Your etymology is at fault. Trow comes from true, not vice versa. There is a universal and immutable truth, deducible from the nature of things.
By whom deducible? Philosophers have investigated the nature of things for centuries, yet no two of them will agree in trowing the same conclusion.
In process of time, moral science will be susceptible of mathematical demonstration, and the principles being universally recognized, all will of necessity hold the same right views.
Oh, possibly. When luxury and disease have exterminated all but a tiny fraction of the human race, these may come to something like the same conclusion.
I doubt it. If only we three survived, we should never agree as to the cause of the calamity.
Oh, very well, very well. But agree to this, that the many are sacrificed to the few, that 99 in 100 are in a perpetual struggle to survive, while the rest wallow in the luxuries wrung from their labours and privations, that luxury and liberty are incompatible, and that every new want you invent for civilized man is a new instrument of torture for him who cannot indulge it. What is more...
Good God, what the devil was that?
To explain what the devil that was, we must, by a trick of dramatic legerdemain, retrace our temporal steps a little. And examine the actions of the two other perambulating parties, Headlong and Milestone, and Cranium and Panscope. Now, in all the thoughts and actions of Headlong, it should be said, there is a remarkable alacrity of progression, which almost annihilates the interval between conception and execution. He sees, that is, nothing between the first step and the last, but pounces upon his object with the impetus of a mountain cataract. Thus, when Milestone remarks, as they stand by a ruined tower on a projecting point of rock, all overgrown with ivy...
This ivy requires clearing. Then, with a polishing of the walls, a plantation of spruce and juniper there, and the conversion of the present rugged and broken ascent from the landside into a beautiful turfed slope, you'd have something to look at. Oh, if I had some gunpowder,
Gunpowder? I have gunpowder.
And he bounds back to the house and returns almost immediately, accompanied by the little butler, a dozen servants with pickaxes and powder, a stove and a poker, together with a basket of cold meat and 2 or 3 bottles of Madeira. Milestone superintends the excavation of the rock, the insertion of the powder into the apertures, the laying of a train. The squire then seizes the poker.
Stand back!
And applies it to the train, so that the ignition runs hissing along the surface. At this moment, however...
There's someone on the tower, look you! There's someone on the tower, look you!
Oh, so there is. What's to be done, Milestone?
Nothing, no need. The tower should be safe if my calculations are correct.
No! Wait! We have yet to observe Panscope and Cranium. For they it is who have ascended the tower and stand on its summit.
The view, Mr Cranium, bringing to mind, as it does, certain passages in La Fontaine, Homer, Rabelais...
Milestone's calculations are correct. Cranium, however, not knowing this, and how could he, bounds under the elastic influence of terror several feet into the air. His ascent being a little out of the perpendicular, he descends with a proportionate curve from the apex of his projection and alights not on the wall of the tower, but in an ivy bush by its side, which, giving way, transfers him to a tuft of hazel at its base, which in turn consigns him to the boughs of an ash rooted in a fissure, which finally transmits him to the waters below. Thus. Headlong, when the smoke clears, seeing Panscope solus in a tragical attitude, concludes that a flying fragment of rock has emancipated the spirit of the craniologist from its terrestrial bondage. It is left to Escot, a person of great natatorial skill, to plunge to his assistance and bring him to the shore.
Bravo! Well done, Mr. Escot! Cranium, my dear fellow, how are you? Now tell me, how much water have you swallowed? Oh, most dangerous stuff in the world, never to be taken internally. I won't have it in the house. Here, drink this.
A bumper of Madeira, then another to be safe, after which the party returns to Headlong Hall. The squire takes care that Cranium is seated next to him at dinner, and plies him so hard with Madeira to prevent him from taking cold that long before the ladies send in their summons to coffee, every organ in his brain is in a complete state of revolution, and the squire rings for 3 or 4 servants to carry him to bed, observing that he is in an excellent way for escaping any ill consequences that might have resulted from his accident. Jenkison, the statu-quo-ite, forbears to remark upon it, but the episode illustrates perfectly his contention that every ill is attended by a counterbalancing good. For the beautiful Cephalis, thus freed from her father's surveillance, is enabled, during the course of the evening, to develop to his preserver, Escot, the full extent of her gratitude.
Oh, who art thou so swiftly flying? My name is Love, the child replies. Swifter I pass than
Escot is passing a restless night, the effect of love, according to some poets, who seem to compose their whining ditties for the purpose of bestowing on others that slumber of which they so pathetically lament the privation.
The question is, should a philosopher be in love? According to Plato, not to say Lucretius, no. On the other hand, since I am and can do nothing about it, the question is not helpful. The question, too, given a philosopher in love, should that passion keep him awake? Obviously not. Therefore, I should immediately go to sleep.
He arises, unslept, at first peep of day, and sallies forth unbuttoned and hat in hand, impervious, by virtue of the fire in his heart, to the morning frost, till he finds himself near the enclosure of a little mountain chapel. He stands on a rustic tombstone and peeps through the window.
Font, altar, grave. Symbols of the 3 great epochs of the featherless biped: birth, marriage, and death.
The middle item of the Trinity arrests his attention, and his imagination places a very picturesque group in the little chapel. Cephalis in bridal apparel, her friend Caprioletta as bridesmaid, Cranium giving her away, and Gaster intoning the ceremony. But who is this as groom? A demon of mistrust insinuates itself into the storehouse of his conceptions, and in place of himself, his imagination sees...
Panscope! Oi mai kakudaimon, kai tris kakudaimon, kai tekrakis, kai pentakis, kai dodekakis, kai muriakis.
Me miserable and thrice miserable and 4 times and 5 times and 10,000 times miserable.
God bless us, 'tis the devil himself.
This from the sexton, entering the churchyard.
God bless your honour, I took you for the devil. I assure you I'm not.
Yes, how could you be? On concentrated ground, look you. Though for all that, I have seen him more than once. In the days when old Nanny Llwyd of Llynisa was alive, God deliver us, a terrible old witch she was, to be sure, and I had to dig a grave, look you. But I brought 2 cocks with me, and tied them by the leg to a tombstone, and dug, and the cocks crowed, and the devil kept his distance. Though, to be sure now, if I hadn't been brave by nature, as I should be, for my father was Owen, ap Llwyd, ap Griffith, ap Shenkin, ap Williams, ap Thomas, ap Morgan, ap Parry, ap Evans, ap Rees, a fine preacher, and a lover of Cwrw.
Ale.
I'd have thought, just now, you see, you was the devil calling Nanny Llwyd. God bless us, to be sure, she should have been buried in the middle of the river, where the devil can't come, as your honour must know.
Yes, indeed.
Though, to be sure, Owen Thomas of Morvabach will have it that once coming back from the inn he saw a strange figure with 5 horns, God save us, sitting on Hugh Llwyd's pulpit, which, your honour must know, is a big rock in the middle of the river.
Of course, he was mistaken.
To be sure he was, for the devil must have been sitting on a piece of rock in a straight line from him on the other side of the river, where he used to sit, look you, while Hugh Llwyd was on his pulpit, and they used to talk across the river, for Hugh Llwyd never raised the devil, except he was safe in the middle of the river, which proves that Owen Thomas was mistaken, do you see?
Yes. I perceive you have a very deep insight into things, and can therefore facilitate the resolution of a question concerning which, though I have no doubt on the subject, I am desirous of obtaining the most extensive and accurate information.
Your honour, look you, to be sure...
You have been sexton here, man and boy, 30 years.
Hamlet, Act 5, Scene 1.
God bless us, look you, how did you know that then?
During that period, you have, of course, dug up many skulls of people of ancient times.
God bless you, sir, skulls as old as the world.
Will you show me a few?
Will you take your Bible oath you don't want them to raise the devil with?
Willingly. I have an abstruse reason for my inquiry.
Oh, an obtuse reason. That alters the case. You'll come with me, if you please, to the Bone House. What did your honour have in mind?
Something extraordinary?
Something extra... look at this, look you. Now, this...
A skull of extraordinary magnitude.
...is the skull, I swear by St. David, of Cadwallader.
Cadwallader? How do you know?
By disreputable reasoning, your honour. He was the biggest man that ever lived, and this is the biggest skull I ever found, you see. Now, look you then.
Nothing could be more logical. My good friend, will you allow me to take this skull away with me?
St. Winifred, bless us, would you have his ghost haunt me for taking his head out of concentrated ground? For look you what his epitaph says. Ye that my bones shall ill bestow, look you, leak in his ground shall never grow, look you.
My dear fellow, you ill bestow them in confounding them with those of these degenerate dwarfs of later generations. I will have this illustrious skull, look you, bound with a silver rim and filled with wine, with this inscription: Nunc tandem, signifying that the pernicious liquor has at last found its proper receptacle, for when the wine is in, the brain is out.
Saying which, he pressed $1 into the hand of the sexton, who instantly stands spellbound by the talismanic influence of the coin, and walks off in triumph with the skull of Cadwallader. The majority of the party is assembled when Escot enters the breakfast room, holding it proudly aloft. Miss Fenarina, starting up in terror at the sight of the fearsome relic, causes the subversion of a cup of chocolate, which a servant is handing to Gaster, into the nape of the neck of O'Prism, who, rising impetuously...
I'll clap an extinguisher in the farthing rustlight of the rascal's light, begotter!
Pushes over the chair of Milestone, who, catching at the first thing to hand, which happens to be a corner of the tablecloth, draws it with him to the floor, involving plates, cups and saucers in one promiscuous ruin. Escot, unconscious that he is the cause of the deterioration, waits for order to be restored, then, placing the skull at the corner of the table, sits next to the beautiful Cephalis and begins breakfast. Cranium's eyes are on the skull.
You seem to have found a rarity.
Indeed.
Cracking an egg.
May one ask...
Of course.
Spreading toast.
But what that's to say, how...
This skull is the skull of a hero. Palai katatethmiotos.
Long dead.
None less, in fact, than Cadwallader.
Oh, treasure of treasures.
Observe this skull. Even that of our reverend friend here, which is the largest and thickest in the company, is no more than half its size. The owner could scarcely have stood less than 9 feet high. The mind, too, participates in the universal and irremediable deterioration of the human race, which this skull sufficiently demonstrates.
Oh, Mr. Escot, how strong you must be to hold such a dreadful conviction and live.
Cephalis, blushing.
Then what a misuse of strength! Leaving aside the fallacy of your opinion, Escot, nothing could be more calculated to produce the very evils it appears to lament than to freeze into despair all the progressive faculties of the human mind.
On the contrary, Foster. Man has no hope whatever of ameliorating his condition until you advocates of perfectibility stop trying to convince him he is going on in a good way when he is really in a deplorably bad one.
I agree certain things could, and therefore will, change for the better.
No, every change is for the worse. Do you not agree, sir?
This last to Cranium, but Cranium hears nothing. His eyes fixed, as one says, on the skull. Indeed, the old gentleman's orbs start so violently from their sockets that the metaphor seems in danger of becoming fact, and that, impelled by Newtonian forces, they will vacate their proper premises and fly to embed themselves in Cadwallader's vacant sockets. Escot, seeing that the charm is working, picks up the skull carelessly and leaves. More of this later. Tradition attributes the foundation of the annual Headlong Christmas Ball to Headlong ap Headlong ap Breakneck ap Headlong ap Cataract ap Pistol ap Rider ap Headlong, who lived about the time of the Trojan War. The ball is indeed an era in the lives of all the beauty and fashion of Carnarvon, Merioneth and Anglesey. The guests will assemble at dinner and depart the following morning after breakfast. Sleep in the interval is out of the question. We are now in the dining hall. Dinner, on this occasion a secondary object, has been dispatched, the cloth and the ladies removed, and the bottle is on its rounds. Now Cranium stands and is about to address the company.
Ladies and gentlemen,
His bump of absent-mindedness is prominent.
the golden age of mental phenomena, which has lain buried in the deepest vein of the mind of physiological research, is now, by a happy combination of practical and speculative investigations, grasped firmly in the hands of physiognomical empiricism. Desirous of disseminating the inexhaustible treasures of which this golden key admits the votaries of philosophical truth, I invite you, when you have sufficiently restored, replenished, refreshed, and exhilarated that osteo sarchai martos splunch nocem dronu romulus, or to employ a more intelligible term, osseo carne sanguinea viscere cartilige nona vomedulare, comphages or shell, the body, which at once envelops and develops that mysterious and inestimable kernel, the desiderative, determinative, ratiocinative, imaginative, inquisitive, appetitive, comparative, reminiscent congeries of ideas and notions, simple and compound, comprised in the comprehensive denomination of mind, to take a peep with me into the mechanical arcana of the anatomico-metaphysical universe. Being not in the least dubitative of your spontaneous compliance, I shall be in the library.
Whereupon he vanishes, leaving a question in the assembled minds.
A conjurer, is it?
Or a tumbler, card tricks perhaps, or musical spoons.
Another bumper, then we'll go and see. Heel tap!
A heel tap, I never could bear it. So fill me a bumper of claret. Let the bottle pass freely, don't shirk it, nor spare it. But a heel tap, I never could bear it.
The library.
Good Lord, skulls? Is he to make them disappear?
Or juggle with them?
And from the ladies...
Water there for the ladies.
Upon which the little butler dispenses the nearest to water allowed in the house, a colourless liquid which, applied to the lips of the ladies, performs wonders.
Gentlemen!
And a craniological orator begins.
Physiologists have been much puzzled by the varieties of moral character in men, as well as the remarkable similarity of habit and disposition in all the individual animals of every other species. A wolf is like all wolves, a tiger like all tigers. In man, the difficulty lies in giving him a definition to cover all cases. Thus, one has defined him as a featherless biped, a definition which equally applies to an unfledged fowl, an animal which forms opinions, than which nothing can be more inaccurate, since very few of the species do. An animal that carries a stick, an attribute belonging to man only, but not to all men always, though it characterizes some of the graver and more imposing varieties, such as physicians, orangutans, and lords-in-waiting. A reasoning animal. No, for idiots are men, as are most politicians and some critics of theatre. No, it appears to me that man may be correctly defined an animal which, without any distinguishing faculty of his own, is, as it were, a bundle of faculties of other animals. Now, every faculty of mind has its corresponding organ of the brain. Unusual development of one of these organs becomes externally obvious by a corresponding lump or bump, exuberance or protuberance on the osseous compages of the occiput and sinciput. Here is the skull of a beaver, and that of a wren. Sir Christopher Wren. Observe the prodigious development of the organ of constructiveness. Here are the skulls of a tiger, carnage, fox, plunder, peacock, vanity. Here is the skull of an illustrious robber who, after a long and triumphant process of depredation and murder, was suddenly checked in his career by means of a certain quality inherent to the preparations of hemp, which I shall call suspensive. Here is the skull of a conqueror who, after overrunning several kingdoms, burning a number of cities and causing the deaths of 2 or 3 millions of men, women and children, was entombed with all the pageantry of public lamentation. Observe in both these skulls the combined development of the organs of plunder, carnage, and vanity. The greater enlargement of the organ of vanity in the hero is the only criterion by which I can distinguish them from each other. Pass them round, please. Notice here the striking development of the organs of destruction, cunning, avarice, and self-love. This was one of the most illustrious statesmen that ever flourished in the page of history. No prizes given.
Tough, man. Yes, sir. Tough. For the love of God, go and tell the band to strike up, or we shall be here forever.
I will say, Your Honour, look you, or it'll be likely to fall out as it did once for my father, Owen up, Hewitt up, Griffith up, Jenkins up, Williams up, Thomas up, Morgan up, Parry up, Evans up, Rees. When the devil got onto his tongue, look you, while he was preaching, and he couldn't stop himself, although they stuck his head in the river, but out came the words still in the bubbles until they had to send for several men in a boat.
Yes, sir.
The butler, you will have gathered, is the sexton's brother.
License to kill, since without such license, the indulgence of his natural propensity may lead him to become a critic of stage plays. If, on the other hand... Where are you going? Kindly return the skulls.
The ballroom has been adorned with great taste and elegance under the direction of Miss Caprioletta Headlong and her friend Miss Cephalis, who are themselves its most beautiful ornaments. The ball is opened by Miss... One moment.
Miss Cephalis.
Mr. Penscope.
You will do me the honour of putting me down for the first set.
Alas, Mr. Penscope, I am already bespoken by Mr. Escot. I beg your pardon?
The second, then?
I'm sorry,
The third?
Forgive me.
The fourth?
Oh, yes, the fourth is free.
Thank you.
And Penscope chafes and frets at the punch bowl while the object of his thwarted adoration joins the object of his thwarted revenge. After his first dances, Escot, who chooses to dance with none other than his beloved, looking for a convenient seat, discovers Jenkison in a corner.
Jenkison, will you take no part in the amusement?
No. The cheerfulness of the occasion induces me to rise. The trouble of such violent exercise induces me to sit still. Were I to see a young lady in want of a partner, gallantry would move me. But as there are enough without me, that motive is null. I have been weighing these points pro and con and remain in statu quo. But you dance, I see. Is it in spite of the dreadful state you think the world in, or because of it?
I believe you guess my motive for dancing.
Yes.
But you are right to question my behavior. I have great objections to dancing.
You don't enjoy it?
That is not relevant. Wild and original man was a calm and contemplative animal. The stings of natural appetite alone aroused him.
Then surely in your own
I say you, let me continue. He satisfied his hunger with roots and fruits. He slaked his thirst in the mountain stream. Sumisgetai te epitukuse.
Reference to the casual slaking of another thirst.
And returned to his peaceful state of meditative repose. Now, let us imagine this tranquil and passionless being meditating the simple question: where am I, whence do I come, and what is the end of my existence? Then, place before him suddenly a fiddler and a fop in silk stockings and pumps, skipping, capering, and throwing himself about. Then, let some perfectibilian genius explain to him that after a long process of ages, his race shall have attained such an advanced stage of perfectibility that creatures such as he sees before him will meet by hundreds, night after night, to grin and caper from sunset to sunrise. Would he not, do you think, groan from his inmost soul for the lamentable condition of his posterity?
I agree there are things to be said against dancing. On the other hand...
You are about to say that it has the advantage of bringing young persons together, which grants a liberty of innocent intercourse between them while preserving a scrupulous attention to the delicacy and propriety of female conduct, which is the fundamental basis of all our most valuable social relations.
Well, yes.
And what is the essence of this species of intercourse which we desire to promote between the young people? False colours, Jenkison, hypocrisy and coquetry. Studied smiles powder over the pockmarks of ill temper. Ignorance and folly take refuge in that unmeaning gabble it would be a profanation to call language, which has been branded small talk. Small indeed, the absolute minimum of the infinitely little.
My con side agrees, Escot, but on the pro side...
The ballroom is the epitome of all that is most worthless. Every petty and malignant passion is called into play. Coquetry is constantly on the alert to captivate, caprice to mortify, and vanity to take offence. An amiable female is rendered miserable for the evening by seeing another in a more attractive gown than her own, who enjoys her triumph with the arrogance of an oriental sultana. Another is pleased to dance with the monster she abhors, for the consolation that she is at least annoying one of her dear friends, who thus hates her as heartily as she hates the friend, but all with a smile.
And the men?
Oh, the men are no better, not much better. And all these malignant and miserable feelings are masked under the uniform disguise of a pretended benevolence. That fine and delicate irony called politeness, which gives so much ease and pliability to the mutual intercourse of civilized man and enables him to assume the appearance of every virtue without the reality of one.
Rousseau.
Now I know what you are going to say. Oh, excuse me.
But before Escot has time to tell Jenkison what he was going to say, the set of dances is terminated, and he flies off to reclaim the hand of the beautiful Cephalis, with whom he figures away with surprising alacrity. And is probably at least as happy as were he a wild man sitting on a rock contemplating the beginning and end of existence. Jenkison remains in statu quo, until Squire Headlong procures him to partner his maiden aunt, Miss Brindlemew Grimalkin Phoebe Tabitha ap Headlong, who, very well contented with him, gives him 2 or 3 ogles, accompanied by a distortion of the countenance intended for a captivating smile. For his part, it being all one to him with whom he dances, or whether he dances at all, he is neither more nor less pleased than if he had been left alone in his corner. Thus they dance till supper. We are now in the great supper room of Headlong Hall, to which the guests have repaired. The centre of the room is dominated by a great table, on which stands a model of Snowdon, from near the summit of which, from a tarn or mountain pool, milk punch cascades inexhaustibly down the miniature rocks to where, falling into a capacious lake below, it washes the mimic foundations of Headlong Hall.
Thus, in contemplating art, we come to an appreciation of nature. I confess I have never seen Snowdon to better effect.
The Reverend Doctor, tasting of the lake.
Now, Chromatic, time to sing for your supper.
Whereupon, with the assistance of his two accomplished daughters, he regales the ears of the company with the following terzetto.
Great twilight, from the shadowy hill discolors nature's vernal bloom, and sheds on grove and field and rill one placid tint of deepening gloom. The sailor sighs mid shoreless seas, touched by the thought of friends afar, as fanned by ocean's flowing breeze, he gazes on the western star. The wanderer hears in pensive dreams the accent of the last farewell, as pausing by the mountain stream, he listens to the evening bell.
Very fine. But do you not think the final figure would be more picturesque, Chromatic, if the mountain stream were dammed to form a circular lake in the
My
centre
dear
of which...
Milestone, as a gentleman of modern taste, you surely pay no attention to the words of a song, which are at best only species of pegs on which to hang crotchets and quavers.
Hootsman!
McLaurel.
Did he again say that sound without sense is as worthless as a print drapple? What is the scrape of a fiddle but a scrattling gut squeak if it doesn't touch any chord in the human sensorium? Notes are the pegs to hang the words on. It's what they're fit for. The rest is nothing but scrawking and squealing.
You go too far, sir. Can you say that this needs words?
That, sir, is beyond words. Ah, there is but one instrument which is the exception to the rule. The bagpipe.
Mercifully, at this moment, an ancient squire, who, being stone-deaf, knows nothing of this caterwauling, stands up, waving a half-pint bumper, and declaims,
To the immortal memory of Headlong the Prider, and to the health of his noble descendant.
Hello, everybody, my lovely guests.
Hail to the headlong, up headlong, oh, hail to the headlong, up headlong.
Come on, all of us,
Headlong up, breakneck up, headlong up, cataract up, pistol up, rider up, headlong. Sound to the health of the headlong up, headlong, blow the crowds to the health of the headlong. Stream ruby glowing on all sides of flowing, shall fall in cascades to the health of the headlong. The headlong up, breakneck up, headlong up, cataract up, pistol up, rider up, headlong.
Breakfast. Miss Brindlemew, Grimalkin, Phoebe, Tabitha ap Headlong, the chorus celebrating the antiquity of her lineage still ringing in her ears, seeks out her nephew, while the guests sip their tea and coffee, and takes him aside.
Harry?
Yes, Aunt Brindlemew?
I've been noting your behaviour during the several stages of the ball, supper, and now breakfast.
Yes, Auntie.
I will not tax you with lack of gallantry, for all the Headlongs are gallant by nature, by breeding, I may say by definition. But I lament to perceive that you were at least as pleased with your bottles of champagne and Burgundy as with any of your delightful partners. I lament that your degree of incombustibility may possibly prove the means of causing our ancient genealogical tree to terminate suddenly in a point. unless you feel yourself moved by my exhortations to follow the example of your ancestors by choosing yourself a fitting and suitable helpmeet to immortalize the pedigree of Headlong ap Rhaeadr.
Oh, egad, Auntie, if that's the dilemma, it's easy fixed. I'll pop the question without much more ado. Have you anyone in mind?
Have you?
Me? No, it's all one to me.
What think you of Miss Nanny Glendu, the lineal descendant of Llewellyn ap Iorwerth?
With the shawl on the feet? Oh, she won't do.
What say you then to Miss Williams of Pontaglasridracht?
Oh, slight difficulty there, Auntie. I hate the sight of her. No, I shall think of somebody presently. I should like to be married on the same day as Caprioletta.
Caprioletta?
Oh, zoons, Auntie, I was to tell you, but it somehow slipped my mind. She's to marry Mr Foster, the philosopher.
A daughter of our ancient family marry a philosopher?
Oh, they're not so bad nowadays. They don't bring it into their lives, you know. They only talk about it. She's a competent girl. She'll keep philosophy out of the kitchen. Egad, I have an idea. Wait there, Auntie.
And true to his cataractual nature, he flies straight to transmute his idea into action.
Chromatic.
With a hearty slap on the shoulder.
How would you like me for a son-in-law?
Very much indeed. May I ask which of my daughters has captivated you?
Which would you suggest?
I surmise that Graziosa has conceived a penchant for Sir Patrick O'Prism, so perhaps to avoid a discordant note in love's harmony...
Tenorino, then, she'll do. Go and tell her, will you?
And off he bounds again.
O'Prism! Oh! Sir Patrick, I find you and I are both to be married.
Are we be James? Then sure won't I wish us both joy, for it's the first I've heard of it. Pray now, who is it that I am to be metamorphosing into Lady O'Prism?
Miss Graziosa Chromatic.
Or Violet and Crimson, sure she'll do as well as another. Though perhaps you can persuade the Aldorfius to draw out a few notes of a more sterling currency than those he scrapes on his violin.
I shall see to it. Wait, while we're about it, I have another splendid idea. Wait there. Escot. Oh! Escot, here are 3 couple of us going to throw off together with the Reverend Dr. Gaster for whipper-in. Now, if you'd make a fourth of this Cephalis, we shall compose, as my father-in-law-to-be would say, a harmonious octave.
Indeed, nothing would be more agreeable to us both, to help us weather the storms of the world's deterioration. But the old gentleman, her father, you know, is not of a mind.
I'll settle him. Wait there. Mr Cranium. Oh! I have to tell you that to wind up the Christmas festivities, 4 marriages are to take place.
Indeed, and who are the parties?
Well, in the first place, my sister Caprioletta and Mr Foster. In the second, Miss Graziosa Chromatic and Sir Patrick O'Prism. In the third, Miss Tenorina Chromatic and your humble servant. And in the fourth, to which by and by your consent is wanting, your daughter.
To Mr Panscope.
To Mr Escot.
What?
Well, who better? He has 10,000 virtues.
Panscope has 10,000 a year.
Virtues?
Pounds.
Virtues on paper. No, I've set my mind on Escot.
I am much obliged to you for dethroning me from my paternal authority.
Who was it fished you out of the water?
What is that to the purpose? The whole process was mechanical and necessary. The explosion necessitated my fright, which necessitated my jump, which necessarily was in a curvilinear ascent, the descent having necessarily a corresponding curve. I was by gravitational necessity attracted first through the ivy, secondly through the hazel, thirdly through the ash, into the water beneath. The motive or impulse, adhibited in the person of Mr Escot, was as powerful on his material compages as the force of gravity on mine. In rerum natura, he could no more help jumping into the water than I could help falling into it.
So you would make no distinction between the man who knocks you down and him who picks you up?
I make this distinction, that I avoid the former as a machine containing a peculiar catabality quality, which I found to be not consentaneous to my mode of pleasurable existence. But I attach no moral merit or demerit to either of them, any more than I would blame a tuft of hemlock if, gathered by mistake for parsley, chopped up small with butter and eaten with boiled chicken, it necessitated a decomposition of my corporeal mechanism. Quod victus fatiere necesse est.
Que sera, sera.
Or praise the morals of a potato.
But you are necessitated to like potatoes and to dislike hemlock.
Only in a digestive or gastronomic sense.
Oh, very well. Then you are necessitated to like Escot better than Panscope in a paternal-legal sense.
That is a non sequitur.
Then this is a sequitur. Your daughter and Escot are necessitated to love one another, and unless you feel necessitated to inhibit your consent, they will feel necessitated to dispense with it.
Really?
To be sure.
Cranium falls into a profound reverie. Then...
Do you think Escot would give me that skull?
Skull? What skull?
The skull of Cadwallader.
Oh, to be sure.
Ascertain the point.
Well, how can you doubt it?
If it were mine, I should not part with it for anything on earth, least of all for a wife.
Wait here. Escot! Oh! I told you I'd settle him.
You have?
There is, however, a hard condition attached to his compliance.
I agree.
To what?
To whatever it is.
The absolute and unconditional surrender of the skull of Cadwallader.
I resign it.
Wait there. Cranium. Oh, the skull is yours.
Then I am satisfied.
Good. Escot. Oh, the lady is yours.
I am the happiest man alive, for what that is worth.
Whereupon Foster, approaching with his beloved caprioletta, cries,
"Ah, so you admit an amelioration in the state of the sensitive man?"
A slight oscillation of good, Foster, in the instance of a solitary individual, by no means affects the solidity of my opinions concerning the general deterioration of the civilized world. It remains my view that we are in a sad way and irrevocably doomed to extinction.
Upon which, presumably so as to allow himself as much time with her as possible in the interim, he flies off to his beautiful Cephalis.
Mr. Panscope, Mr. Cranium, prepare yourself for unfortunate news.
I cannot marry your daughter.
Why not?
Is that not what you have to tell me?
I was to tell you that she cannot marry you.
Precisely, which is why I cannot marry her.
You appear not too thrown down by it.
Why should I be? The monotonous system of female education brings every individual of the sex to so remarkable an approximation of similarity that no wise man can suffer himself to be annoyed by a loss so easily repaired. As a sea captain of my acquaintance once remarked with more truth than elegance, there was never a fish taken out of the sea but left behind another as good.
Impossible, since no two individuals, not even female ones, ever possess identically developed cranial organs.
Besides which, after lecturing your daughter for 10 minutes on a multiplicity of subjects, she confessed to not understanding a word I said. Now, while one neither requires nor expects understanding from women or the lower orders, one does expect that they express their non-comprehension with humility rather than with belligerence. As to your craniological argument, it has been undubitably proved by a multiplicity of...
And for half an hour they discuss heatedly the similarity of all women and the dissimilarity of all skulls. But we must leave them. For the squire, who makes the point of never losing a moment in the accomplishment of a favourite object, suffers no time to elapse before, by the clerical dexterity of the Reverend Dr. Gaster, the spiritual metamorphosis of 8 into 4 is effected.
Will you, Tenorina, Graziosa, Cephalis, and Caprioletta, take these men respectively to thy wedded husbands?
I will.
I will.
I will. I will.
Will you, Harry, Patrick, Percy, Thomas, take these respective women to thy wedded wives?
I will.
I will. I will. I will.
The ceremony is over. The whole party is dispersed. Foster and Escot, in painful scenes of farewell good taste forbids us to attend, have torn themselves from their brides until, all necessary preparations made, they will be reunited in the metropolis. We leave the three philosophers, then, in the same physical circumstance in which we first met them, but journeying in the contrary direction.
According to your respective systems, you know, I ought to congratulate you, Foster, on a change for the better, which I do most cordially, and to condole with you, Escot, on a change for the worse, though when I consider your choice, I should violate every principle of probability in doing so.
You would do well to follow our example, Jenkison. The circle of general philanthropy originated and still proceeds from that narrower circle of domestic affection which first set limits to the empire of selfishness, and by purifying the passions and enlarging the affections of all mankind, has given to the views of benevolence an increasing and illimitable expansion, which will finally diffuse happiness and peace over the whole surface of the world.
That cannot be your view, Escot.
Not in the least. The affection of two congenial spirits, united not by legal bondage and superstitious imposture, but by mutual confidence and reciprocal virtues, is the only counterbalancing consolation in this scene of mischief and misery. Luxury, despotism, and avarice have so seized and entangled 999 out of every 1,000 of the human race, that the matrimonial contract, which ought to be the most easy, the most free, and the most simple of all engagements, is become the most slavish and complicated. A system of bargain and barter, and commerce and trick, and chicanery, and dissimulation and fraud. Females, condemned during the flower of their youth to a worse than monastic celibacy, debarred from the hope to which their first affections pointed, finally become willing to take up with any coxcomb or scoundrel whom that merciless and mercenary gang of cold-blooded slaves and assassins called, in the ordinary prostitution of language, friends, may designate a prudent choice. While the young men are driven by the same vile superstitions from the company of the most amiable and modest of the opposite sex to that of those miserable victims and outcasts of the very society whose pernicious institutions first caused their aberrations, and which, in consigning them without one tear of pity to penury, infamy, and disease, condemns them to bear the burden of its own atrocious absurdities.
On the other hand...
Thus, the youth of one sex is consumed in slavery, disappointment, and spleen. That of the other, in frantic folly and selfish intemperance, till at length, on the necks of a couple so enfeebled, so perverted, society throws the yoke of marriage. That yoke, which, once riveted on the necks of its victims, clings to them like the poisoned garments of Medea.
Yes, but
what could be expected from these ill-assorted yoke-fellows, but that, like ill-tempered hounds coupled by a tyrannical sportsman, they should drag on their indissoluble fetter, snarling and growling and pulling in different directions? What could be expected from their wretched offspring, but sickness and suffering, premature decrepitude and untimely death? In this, as in every other institution of civilized society, avarice, luxury, and disease constitute the triangular harmony of the life of man. Avarice conducts him to the abyss of toil and crime. Luxury seizes on his ill-gotten spoil, and while he revels in her enchantments or groans beneath her tyranny, disease bursts upon him and sweeps him from the earth.
You are talking, of course, of others, not of us.
Others, of course, others.
Well, you know, Escot, I find that your theory forms an admirable counterpoise to your example. As far as I am attracted by the one, I am repelled by the other. Thus, the scales of my philosophical balance remain eternally equiponderant, and I remain in statu quo.
Headlong up, headlong, forward, hail to the headlong up, headlong. Come on, all of us, sing. Headlong up, breakneck up, headlong up, cataract up, pistol up, rider up, headlong. Sing that, sing. Sound to the health of the headlong up, headlong, through the whole will come to the health of the headlong. Stream ruby glowing on all sides of flowing, shall fall in cascades to the health of the headlong. The headlong up, ring neck up, headlong up, cataract up, pistol up, rider up, headlong.
Headlong Hall by Thomas Love Peacock was dramatised by James Saunders and narrated by Michael Hordern. Daniel Massey played Escot, Ronald Lacey Foster, John Grillo Jenkison, John Horsley Cranium, William Simons Headlong, Andrew Branch Milestone, Alan Dudley Gaster, Simon Cuff Gaulen the Sexton, Richard Tate O'Prism, Michael Deacon McLaurel, John Baddeley Chromatic, Norman Bird Panscope, Polly James Cephalis, Joan Walker Aunt Brindlemew, and Caroline Gruber Tenorina. The music was composed by Terence Albright and played by Catherine Adams and Skylar Kanga. The play was directed by Matthew Walters.